All right, today we're going to break down something that's less of a strategy and more of a survival discipline for the absolute best brands out there. It's called the value pivot architecture. You know, in a market where everyone is just screaming to be heard, this isn't just another tactic. It's a whole new way of thinking that separates the businesses that really explode from those that just get by. Just let that sink in for a second. You've got a great product, right? You have customers who genuinely love what you do, and yet, does it still feel like you're fighting tooth and nail for every single dollar, justifying your price over and over again, trapped in this cycle of sending proposals that just go nowhere? Well, why is that? It's probably because you're suffering from a silent killer of good offers. Okay, let's really get into this, because this is the absolute core of the problem. It's called the utility trap, and it's that little voice in your head that says, hey, if people aren't buying, I just need to add more. You know, more features, more bonuses, more value. It's like a chef thinking the fix for a bland dish is to just dump the entire spice cabinet into it. But what if that's the single worst move you could make? What if adding more stuff actually makes you look cheaper, more desperate, and a lot more like everybody else? So here's the plan for this explainer. We're going to walk through the whole story. We'll start with the wrong shelf paradox. That's the root of the issue. Then we're going to jump back in time a bit to the great feature crisis to see how we ended up here. After that, we'll pop the hood on the 10-minute reframe engine. That's the real mechanism for change. We'll look at the psychology, the steps to build your own pivot, and finally, we'll get to the simple, powerful idea that acts as the bridge over comparison. So, let's kick things off with part one, the wrong shelf paradox. This is all about accepting a fundamental truth of business right now. The battle for sales today, it's not about being better. It's about being placed in the right mental category inside your customer's head. Think about it like a grocery store. You could have the most incredible artisanal cheese in the world, but if you stick it in the dairy aisle right next to the cheap plastic-wrapped singles, guess what standard it's going to be judged by? This is a game of placement, and winning means you have to change aisles completely.
And what I love about this slide is how clearly it lays out the shift. The old game, it was all about betterment. You just add more features, right? Create a longer and longer checklist to try and justify your price and compete on value. But here's the killer problem. In today's world, your new feature can be copied by tomorrow morning. So in the new game, the winning move is placement. You don't add features, you change the entire frame of the conversation. You don't justify your price, you shift the customer's perception of what they're actually buying. You stop competing on value, which is just a race to the bottom, and you start competing on context. Because features are cheap, but context is priceless.
But you know, how did we even get to this point? This wasn't some overnight thing. And that brings us to a really crucial part of the story, Section 2, the Great Feature Crisis. To really get why the value pivot is so powerful, you have to understand the economic pressure and the market shifts that made this whole thing an absolute necessity. This is the origin story of why better just stopped working. So, in the mid-2020s, the business world kind of hit a brick wall. First, this thing that had been the cornerstone of marketing forever, the unique selling proposition, or USP, it basically died. The whole goal was always to have a feature nobody else had, right? But with rapid prototyping and SaaS technology, if you launched something new on a Monday, 3 of your competitors had a knockoff by Friday. Being unique was impossible to keep up. And that led right to point 2, the innovation sales gap. I mean, can you imagine your teams working around the clock, pouring money into R&D just to see it have almost zero effect on the bottom line? It was this insane cycle of massive effort for tiny rewards. And out of that crisis came point 3, the rise of a new type of leader, the value architect, who just got it. They understood the game had changed for good.
And this slide, wow, it just lays out the brutal reality of that gap. I mean, look at this. Imagine pouring 80% of your company's creative and financial firepower, all the late nights, the stress, the passion from your best people into innovation, into making the thing better, only to see a measly 2% bump in sales. It's not sustainable. It's soul-crushing. It's a dead end. This is the very definition of the utility trap, and it's the exact moment the smartest folks in the room realized we have to stop trying to improve the product and start improving the position.
So what did these new value architects do? They pulled off this brilliant conceptual pivot. They stopped selling a product and they started selling an outcome. The focus shifted from a laundry list of features to this powerful idea called expense substitution. All that means is you position your offer not as a new cost, but as a replacement for a much bigger, usually hidden, existing expense. Look at the examples here. Gong isn't selling you sales software. No, they're selling risk mitigation. They are replacing the massive cost of a sales team that doesn't hit its numbers. Deal isn't just selling HR software, they're selling global compliance, replacing the catastrophic financial and legal risk of messing up your international payroll. They move their product off the crowded software shelf and onto the exclusive shelf of critical business infrastructure. And this brings us right to the heart of it all, the part you can actually start using. Section 3, the 10-minute reframe engine. And listen, this isn't just a clever sales pitch or some copywriting trick. This is the core mechanism. This is the engine that makes the entire value pivot work. It's a deliberate, repeatable mental exercise designed to completely shift perception in literally any sales conversation. The engine has 4 clear stages, and we're going to walk through every single one. First up, anchor identification. That's where we find the invisible force that's dragging your price down. Second, outcome extraction, where we find the real treasure you're selling. Third, the substitution reframe. That's the magic moment, the pivot itself. And fourth, risk transference, where we make your offer the absolute safest bet. Okay, let's break them down. Stage 1 is all about getting real with yourself. You have to ask honestly, who is my neighbor on the shelf? When a potential customer thinks about a service like mine, what's the default comparison that just pops into their brain? Because our brains are lazy. They're always looking for shortcuts. For a freelance copywriter, that neighbor is almost always a platform like Upwork. And that instantly, subconsciously, puts you in a $15 an hour neighborhood. And here's the thing. If you don't like that neighborhood, you can't just yell that you're better. You have to pack up and move. Okay, stage 2. This requires you to look past your own process. Just ignore the work, the hours you clock, the tasks you check off. Focus on the wealth you create. What's the ultimate result? Better yet, what's the shadow result? This is the hidden, life-changing outcome your service really delivers. It's the ripple effect. So for a copywriter, it's not writing words, it's building a sales asset that prints money while you sleep. For a personal trainer, it's not 1 hour of exercise, it's the confidence to walk into any room and feel like you own it. You've got to dig for that deeper value.
And now we're at stage 3. This is the pivot point. This is where the magic really happens. You've identified your bad neighborhood, you've extracted your real value, so now you have to make a conscious, strategic decision. You have to deliberately shatter that old comparison your customer was making. This step is all about getting yourself out of that old category for good. And the way you do that is by comparing yourself to the alternative disaster. This is the absolute core of the reframe. You stop being a slightly fancier version of the cheap option, and you reposition yourself as the only sane alternative to complete and utter failure. You're not a vitamin anymore. You are the antidote. You are the insurance policy against the very thing that keeps your customer up at night. So let's see how this looks in the real world. As you can see, your copywriting service is no longer a $5,000 fee. That's an expense line item. It is now 1/10 the cost of a failed product launch. See? That's an investment in certainty. The whole conversation just changed. You're not a service provider they can just swap out for someone cheaper. You are a fractional asset, a strategic part of their team they literally can't afford to lose. The point is, you are no longer an expense to be cut. You're an investment to be maximized.
And that brings us to the final stage, stage 4, risk transference. Here, you use your powerful new frame to make the decision to do nothing, to just stand still, feel infinitely more expensive and way more risky than hiring you. The cost of an action, of that failed launch, of that massive compliance fine, is framed as being astronomically higher than your price. This is a brilliant psychological move called contextual inversion. Basically, instead of them scrutinizing your price, you make them scrutinize their problem. And we are all hardwired to be way more motivated by avoiding a loss than by chasing a gain. Suddenly, your price isn't the focus anymore, the problem is.
So, the engine itself is pretty clear, but why does it work so incredibly well? I mean, it almost feels like a Jedi mind trick, but it's not magic, it's science. And that brings us to section 4, where we look under the hood at the behavioral economics, the psychology that this entire architecture is built on. Okay, first up is something called anchoring and adjustment. Our brains are hardwired to be lazy, We don't calculate value from scratch. We look for the very first piece of information we're given, an anchor. Now, if you let your customers set the anchor, like your competitor's price, they will always pick the cheapest one. You have to provide the anchor first, and that anchor is the massive cost of the alternative disaster. This ties right into the substitution principle. We almost never ask, is this a good value? We ask, is this a better value than the other thing I'm considering? By making the disaster the other option, you are now governing valuation. You control the whole conversation. And the end goal here is simple: to be encoded in your customer's mind not as just another service, but as the only solution to their real problem.
All right, let's shift gears now into Section 5 and see how this all comes together in practice. It's one thing to get the theory, but it's another thing entirely to actually apply it. How do you go from understanding this to actually doing it? This section is all about giving you the blueprint to architect your own value pivot.
Here it is, a clear 4-step path to getting this right. Step 1, map your default anchor. You have to identify your enemy on the shelf because you can't escape a trap until you know you're in it. Step 2, engineer your shadow result. I want you to dig deep and find that one outcome. Maybe it's speed, maybe it's certainty, maybe it's status that the cheap alternatives simply can't promise. Step 3, and this is so important, execute the category flip, which we'll look at next. And finally, step 4, you audit everything relentlessly. You're searching for the resistance threshold. If customers are still giving you a hard time on price, it means your anchor is wrong or your disaster just isn't scary enough. You just keep refining until your price becomes the easiest part of the whole conversation.
I love this slide because it shows just how powerful the category flip can be. It's just a simple change in language, but it has these profound psychological effects. Just look at these. If you're a consultant selling your time by the hour, rewrite your offer as if you're a repeatable, scalable piece of software that gets a perfect result every time. If you're selling software, which can feel cold, reframe it as a tireless 24/7 employee that costs a tiny fraction of a human salary and never, ever takes a vacation. If you're an agency, stop talking about deliverables and position yourself as an investment fund. You're not spending their money, you're investing it to deliver a measurable return. It's a simple language change that completely redefines your value.
And that brings us right to our final section, the big idea that ties this whole thing together. This is the bridge over comparison. This is the core insight, the simple truth that this entire architecture is built on.
It's this realization that huge growth, it doesn't come from just adding more features or just working harder and harder. It's not a straight line of betterment. Real growth is a leap. It's a learned skill. It's the skill of building a bridge of context over this endless, noisy canyon of comparison, so your customer can just walk easily from their problem straight to your solution. At the end of the day, this is what it's all about. You're proving that you aren't just another vendor. You are a director of outcomes. You're giving your customer the clarity and the confidence to make the right choice. Because the best marketing, the best selling, it doesn't push people through a funnel. It builds a powerful frame that pulls them almost irresistibly toward true value.